A river flows from mountain peaks, cold and pure, carrying minerals that give life to everything downstream. By the time it reaches the valley, settlements have formed along its banks. People build walls to direct the current, construct channels for irrigation, and erect monuments celebrating the water's arrival. Eventually, someone claims ownership of the river itself. They establish rules for who may drink, create hierarchies of access, and write volumes explaining what the water truly means. Meanwhile, the original spring still flows from the mountain, indifferent to these constructions, available to anyone willing to make the climb. This image captures what George Gurdjieff saw when he looked at Christianity in the 20th century. Somewhere between the living transmission and the institution, something fundamental had reversed itself. The path meant to liberate consciousness had become a structure for maintaining sleep. What began as an inner revolution had calcified into outer conformity. And the most unsettling part? Most people could no longer distinguish between the mountain spring and the valley's elaborate waterworks. Gurdjieff called this distinction the Christ principle versus the church. He wasn't speaking about buildings or denominations, though these played their part. He meant something deeper, more pervasive, more difficult to perceive because it mirrors a split within each person who ever encountered spiritual teaching. There exists Christ as living force, as cosmological function, as the pattern of conscious transformation. And then there exists Christ as a historical figure, theological concept, moral authority, the version that can be controlled, systematized, made safe for society. The Christ principle operates like sunlight. It doesn't require belief to warm your skin or make plants grow. It functions through laws, through precise conditions, through what Gurdjieff termed objective consciousness. This teaching never belonged to one people, one era, or one revelation. It appeared wherever humans developed the capacity to receive it, wearing different cultural garments, but transmitting identical current. The technology of awakening predates Christianity, survives beyond it, cares nothing for religious boundaries. Think of consciousness as a spectrum from mechanical sleep to intentional awareness. Most humans occupy the lower ranges, reacting rather than acting, identified with every thought that drifts through their mental space. They believe themselves awake because their eyes are open, because they can navigate social obligations and professional duties. But watch closely. Notice how seldom genuine choice appears, how often yesterday's conditioning drives today's behavior. They forget God by forgetting love. They deny Christ the moment they let consciousness slip away. This creates a void that cannot be filled by Sunday's sermon. The Christ principle addresses this condition directly. It offers specific methods for increasing consciousness, self-observation without judgment, separation from identification, conscious suffering rather than mechanical reaction, and the development of presence that can witness internal processes without drowning in them. These aren't moral suggestions. They're psychological techniques, repeatable and verifiable, producing measurable changes in how awareness functions. These are the techniques that bring you closer to Christ. Christ demonstrated this transformation in his own being. Every parable, every encounter, every teaching pointed toward this shift, from sleep to waking, from mechanical to conscious, from multiplicity to unity. When he spoke of dying to be reborn, he wasn't making a poetic metaphor. He described the death of false personality, that collection of borrowed opinions and conditioned responses everyone mistakes for themselves. What's born afterward isn't an improved ego, but genuine individuality, consciousness capable of independent function. The church, as Gurdjieff understood it, preserved the words while losing the music. It collected Christ's sayings into scripture, formalized his methods into ritual, and transformed living practice into historical commemoration. The shift seems subtle until you examine its consequences. A technique becomes a symbol. An exercise in presence becomes a ceremony. This is dangerous because you repeat the lyrics but forget the rhythm and music. Consider how this operates in practice. Christ taught about the kingdom of heaven within, accessible through specific inner work, requiring transformation of consciousness itself. The Church taught about the kingdom of heaven elsewhere, accessible through correct belief, requiring conformity to established doctrine. One demands everything and promises nothing. The other promises everything and demands relatively little. Which teaching attracts larger crowds? Which builds cathedrals? Which survives centuries of political pressure and cultural change? The version that maintains comfort, that assures salvation through external means, that never insists you actually wake up from the dream you're living. The Church didn't corrupt Christ's message through malice, but through the same force that corrupts all esoteric teaching when it encounters mass consciousness. The need to be understood by those not yet capable of understanding. Picture a music conservatory that stopped teaching students to play instruments. They played recordings of great performances to listen and learn. Students would graduate knowing every detail of Beethoven's biography, could describe the emotional content of his symphonies, and might even experience genuine feelings when listening to the music. But none could produce a single note themselves. They'd possess knowledge about music while remaining utterly without musical ability. This describes most religious education. People learn about Christ, about his teachings, about theological interpretations spanning 2 millennia. They can quote scripture, attend services, and participate in community. All of this remains valuable at certain levels. But none of it produces the transformation Christ actually taught. None of it generates the shift from mechanical to conscious, from sleeping to awake, from false self to real I. Gurdjieff emphasized that authentic spiritual teaching always works on 3 levels simultaneously: the physical body, the emotional center, and the intellectual mind. Development requires balanced attention to all 3, specific exercises targeting each, and integration of the whole organism toward higher function. The Christ principle addressed this triad through prayer that engages the body, love that transforms emotion, and teaching that awakens intellect. The Church reduced this trinity to intellectual assent. Believe correctly, feel appropriately during designated moments, and perform prescribed physical actions on schedule. The body kneels according to ritual rather than internal necessity. Emotion follows the seasonal calendar rather than authentic movement. Intellect accepts rather than investigates, agrees rather than verifies through personal experience. Something crucial gets lost in this translation. The difference between believing Christ rose from death and experiencing resurrection within your own consciousness spans an infinite distance. One requires nothing but mental acceptance. The other demands complete transformation, death of everything false within you, emergence of something that was always potential but never actual. One you can accomplish sitting in a pew. The other might require decades of sustained inner work. Yet here's where Gurdjieff's perspective becomes genuinely radical. He didn't condemn the Church as evil or useless. He saw it as necessary, even inevitable. Esoteric teaching cannot survive in pure form when released into general culture. It must clothe itself in exoteric structure, must create forms that allow ordinary consciousness to approach gradually what it cannot grasp directly. The Church serves as an outer court, a preliminary stage, a protective container for teaching that would otherwise be destroyed by incomprehension or misuse. Think of it as a school system. Elementary education serves an essential function, introducing basic concepts and building foundational skills. But imagine if everyone stopped at 3rd grade, convinced they'd completed education itself, never suspecting that higher learning existed. They'd defend their elementary understanding against any suggestion of deeper knowledge. They would ridicule advanced mathematics as an unnecessary complication of simple arithmetic. This mirrors the relationship between the Church and Christ principle. The institution provides an entry point, introduces vocabulary, and creates a community for those beginning the search. Problems arise only when entry becomes destination, when preliminary becomes final, and when a protective container claims to contain the entirety of what it was meant to protect. Every generation faces the same choice, though few recognize their choosing. Will you mistake the pointing finger for the moon? Will you stop at the riverbank and worship the waterworks? Or will you trace the current back to its source? Will you accept the comfort of organized belief? Or will you undertake the climb toward direct experience? The climb, Gurdjieff insisted, cannot be accomplished alone. Christ gathered students not to create a church, but to establish conditions for transformation. Conscious development requires friction with other beings, struggles that reveal your mechanical patterns, mirrors showing what you cannot see in yourself. But the group serves the work, exists for awakening. When it becomes an end in itself, when belonging replaces becoming, the same reversal occurs. You can observe this distinction operating in your own relationship with spiritual teaching right now. Do you seek understanding that makes you comfortable, or understanding that disturbs your sleep? Do you want confirmation of what you already believe, or do you genuinely wish to see what you've never seen before? The part of you that wants comfort will always gravitate toward the church. The part capable of transformation hungers for the Christ principle, regardless of the name it carries. This isn't about abandoning tradition or rejecting community. It's about recognizing different levels of teaching, different stages of development, and different functions that serve different needs. Some require the structure, the ritual, the communal support. Others have wrung from these whatever nourishment they can provide and must move beyond, must climb toward the source, must verify through direct experience what they once accepted on faith. The tragedy Gurdjieff identified wasn't that the church existed, but that it claimed a monopoly on Christ. It declared itself sole interpreter, the only path, the necessary mediator between human and divine. In doing so, it obscured the very thing it claimed to preserve, the possibility of direct contact, unmediated experience, conscious relationship with forces that Christianity named in one way, but that operate under any name or none. Sometimes, in quiet moments, a certain sorrow surfaces when contemplating this reversal. If one could speak across centuries to that teacher in Galilee, what could be said except this? Forgive us. We took your invitation to the inner kingdom and built outer empires. We transformed your call to awaken into permission to sleep more comfortably. You offered keys to unlock consciousness, and we gilded them, hung them on walls, wrote treatises about their symbolic meaning. Everything except actually turning them in the locks you indicated. The apology feels necessary because the misunderstanding wasn't innocent confusion. It was willful, though perhaps unconscious, choosing external validation over internal transformation, because the former requires so much less. You can build cathedrals without changing yourself. You can establish hierarchies, claim divine authority, wage wars in holy names, all while remaining precisely as mechanical, as asleep, as identified with ego, as those who never heard the teaching at all. Perhaps more so because spiritual pride sleeps deeper than ordinary ignorance. How many sought power in your name who never attempted the inner work you demonstrated? How many claim to speak for you while ignoring everything you actually said about the kingdom within, about dying to false self, about the narrow gate that leads to life? The sorrow isn't sentimental. It's recognition of staggering loss, 2,000 years of human consciousness that might have evolved, countless beings who might have awakened, all diverted into external structures that promise salvation while preventing the very transformation salvation requires. This grief matters because it reveals something still alive in whoever feels it. The part of you that recognizes the betrayal, that senses what was lost, that feels genuine sadness over this cosmic misunderstanding. That part isn't sleeping. That's the fragment of consciousness capable of hearing what the teaching actually transmitted. And perhaps that's the real apology. Not words spoken to a historical figure, but the commitment to stop participating in the reversal, to choose the harder path, to honor the original transmission by doing the work it always demanded. The Christ principle flows still, cold and pure, from heights most never attempt to reach. It asks nothing and offers everything. It demands you die to what you've been and risk discovering what you might become. It promises no comfort, guarantees no salvation, provides no certainty, except consciousness can increase, sleep can end, the mechanical can give way to the intentional. The choice remains where it always was, in you, beyond all structures and institutions, before belief and doubt. Will you settle for descriptions of the water, or will you make the climb yourself? The mountain waits, indifferent to your decision. The spring flows on.